Welcome in, everyone. Christian Ojackson here with a very special guest, Ben Hutchins, who covers Iowa State for the Quad City Times. Ben, thanks for joining me.
You bet, Christian. Good to be here, man. I've seen the YouTube, and you have a lot of good stuff going. A lot of different college basketball teams you've been looking at. So I'm curious to see what your audience thinks about how Iowa State might stack up in there.
So this is my last preview in my series before the season starts, and Iowa State's a team I absolutely had to get to because what TJ has built there has been really incredible in just 4 short years. The worst defense he's had was 13th in the country on KenPom. Last year, the best offense by far in his tenure, up to 19th. The pace was way faster last year. Just a really exciting team. I know the Keyshawn Gilbert injury and Momcilovic missed time kind of tainted what could have been a team that I thought was a true national title contender for most of the season. So you bring back some key pieces, of course, in Lipsey, in Momcilovic, in Jefferson, and you bring in some interesting guards and in a transfer in Dominic Nelson that I'm really excited about. So setting the stage there, tell me how you feel about this offseason for TJ Otzelberger and what the ceiling is for this team this year.
I feel like it was a solid offseason with TJ. You know, he didn't go out and get the splashy hire. He didn't go out and get kind of the huge name in the transfer portal. But I don't think that's what he's built his program on, Christian. He looks for guys who fit his system. And I think the players he brought in, Dominic Nelson, you mentioned one of them, really fit that. If you can wake up at 5:30 in the morning and get to Otzelberger's practices and just get invested in this culture, the defense, the mindset, the mentality of it, that's what's going to make you a successful player in this Iowa State basketball system. So I think with that in mind, it probably was a fairly successful offseason in terms of the additions. The subtractions are tough. You mentioned Keyshawn Gilbert and Curtis Jones, the 2 leading scorers from last year. Those guys aren't going to be replaced overnight.
I want to start with just bringing back Tamin Lipsey. Obviously brings so much on the defensive end. He's the heart and soul. He's the drumbeat of the team. How has he grown, or what's been kind of his focus this offseason, and just any updates on him entering his senior year?
Yeah, I think the big storyline with him right now is just getting him healthy. It's such a shame, Christian. He was battling through injuries pretty much all of last season. That's why we saw, I think, a lot of his offensive numbers dip. He still gave you that same presence defensively, running the offense, and being the heart and soul of this team. He had a hand injury, a wrist injury, all sorts of things happened to him last year. And even in the NCAA tournament, he wasn't the same guy. But this year, he had been fairly healthy up until 4 weeks ago when he sprains his MCL. So Tamin, he's right now, I think, focused on getting fully back for that. I do expect him to be back. We talked to Otzelberger yesterday, and he said, hey, I don't think there's an urgency to rush him back, but I do expect Tamin Lipsey to be able to play, maybe some limited minutes in the opener against FDU if the coaching staff elects to do it. So I think with Lipsey, I think this year, Christian, the big story is going to be, what does he bring offensively? I think his sophomore season, he was so good shooting the ball. Mm-hmm. It was such a big jump. And then last year, I think those injuries took away from some of that. So if Lipsey is able to get back to that sophomore year offensive level, then that'll be huge for this Iowa State team as it tries to replace a lot of the backcourt production. And you're always going to get the diving on the floor, the hustle. I mean, that's why Tamin Lipsey's always coming up hurt, because he doesn't know how to play not giving 100% on that defensive end.
As great of a player he is, and even as the offensive progression, getting healthier and shooting the basketball better and everything he does facilitating the ball, the thing that really got me excited about Iowa State, and a lot of people, was what Curtis Jones and Keyshawn Gilbert were able to do off the bounce in transition, just creating in situations where, nothing was happening offensively. They just really, like I said, rose that ceiling. So I'm kind of eyeing Nelson or these freshman guards, Jamarian Bateman and Killian Toure, as guys that could potentially give that element, because I'm not expecting Tamin to be anything other than he's an amazing player in what he is, but that's not, what I'm saying? It's a different dimension. So do you think that dimension can be unlocked with those guys?
I think it can. It's going to be interesting to see who steps up. You're right. I think Tamin Lipsey would be much more comfortable in the distributing role. I don't think you want Tamin Lipsey as your best playmaker, stepping back and making threes. That's not what he's best at. So for that role, Christian, I think I might be looking at Milan Momcilovic. Again, he's maybe not as much of a creator as those two guys are, but he has worked a lot on stepping back and making deeper three-point range. I think that could be the guy who just makes the three-pointers. At some point, you need somebody to make some of these three-pointers that Jones and Gilbert did so effectively last season. I think I'm looking at Momcilovic there. Nate Heise is another guy who's maybe going a little bit underrated into this season. He came in last year from UNI, Northern Iowa, and it took him about until February to get going. He was bad offensively up until that February point. He kind of talked to us a little bit this month about the confidence that he didn't have immediately after the start of the season for the first time in his life. He's a senior and he doesn't have confidence on the basketball court. And then it took him a few months to get that. And as the Iowa State Cyclones went into the NCAA tournament, Nate Heise was probably, their most effective shooter from a three-point perspective. He finished at around 40%, which was remarkable considering how poorly he started. So if Heise can hit the ground running, and he looked great in his exhibition against Northwestern, not quite as good against Creighton, but if Heise can hit the ground running, that'll be, I think, maybe the first guy who takes a crack at replacing some of that backcourt scoring.
Momcilovic's three-point shooting last year was really lights out. He was good as a freshman, but last year he shot, basically 40% from deep. And I also love, he's obviously in a different mold as a Gilbert or Jones, but he's still a guy who can create for himself in different areas of the floor and obviously shoot the basketball at a high level. That's your starting 1, 2, 3, right? Taman, Heise, Momcilovic.
That's right.
And then we'll go Joshua Jefferson at the 4, who was a great transfer fit last year. Just, the post scoring, the passing, 3 assists per game, and obviously defensively. Anything different to expect from him this year?
I think Jefferson could be a focal point of the season this year because last year, you're right, he comes in, he's a really, if you get to know him, a humble, kind of down-to-earth guy who's so content to pass the ball. He's one of Iowa State's best passers, top assist men, and he plays the 4 most of the time, which kind of gives you an insight to the person he is. And then you realize as the season's going on, hey, Joshua Jefferson might be the best player on this team. He might be the highest NBA prospect potentially one day on this team. And I think this year, with the vacated scoring that we've talked about, I think Jefferson could be a guy who's leaned on a little bit more into that. He's going to have to get used to being the first guy on opponents' scouting reports. That's something I'm going to be really curious to see how he handles that. Offensively, he'll shoot some threes, but most of the time he's content, scoring and operating in the paint there. And it'll be interesting to see if opponents, are going to be able to take him away. And if you are the best guy on this team, that means you're going to be in situations, in games, in stretches of the season where I don't care if you're getting double teamed, Joshua. We need 14, 15 points from you tonight. And it'll be interesting to see as a guy who did that so well last year when maybe he wasn't the lead draw on a scouting report, what he's able to do against more of that attention this season.
And if he does see a lot of those doubles, that means the aforementioned guys, they got to hit their open threes. Like that's how you get that offense back to that top 20-ish level, which obviously is ideal if you're trying to compete for a championship. So Blake Buchanan comes in from Virginia and Eric Mulder from Purdue Fort Wayne. Not very sexy ads in the portal. It's not going to make anyone's list, but these are guys who can defend in fit TJ system. Tell me about their integration into this program and what you've been hearing about them this summer.
Yeah, you're spot on. Not the Oscar Clough kind of ad that had all the fans excited, but those are the TJ Otzelberger guys. Mulder, really wanting to be here. He's from Purdue Fort Wayne, local guy, local talent. So Mulder's in his last year and he's coming in, I think, as more of the depth piece at the 5. Mm-hmm. Blake Buchanan is going to be the guy who your audience is going to want to get to know as the 5-man for this Cyclone team. And Buchanan, he's been doing the jumps, he's been getting the starts. He was one of the most efficient offensive players in the country. I think Ken Palm had him at number 1 last season with Virginia. Damn. And that's because they play so slowly, and it's a completely different type of offense for Buchanan this season as he's, kind of adjusting to this Iowa State team. And I don't think Buchanan's role is going to be as a big scorer. I don't think that's what Iowa State has in mind for him. I do think, he's going to be relied on to play a lot of minutes down low and be a body and just be physical, set screens, all of those kinds of things. So I don't think we're going to see as much of an offensive focal point for Buchanan as maybe we did at Virginia, but he's certainly a guy who's fit well in this system and is going to be kind of the physical 5 that's so important to a TJ Otzelberger team.
So I mean, that offensive stat's crazy to me because when I think of him at Virginia, The only thing that really stood out to me, he was kind of a zero to me. What stood out to me was that he can really move his feet as a big guy, like in those hard hedges, and obviously that's the way Virginia plays, the way Iowa State plays, like that's such a key thing for a big guy, and like for it's kind of like I just trust TJ, like him coming from Virginia and being with TJ. I'm so like I would be shocked if he's not a great defensive fit. I would just love to see just whether it's on the glass or offensively just finishing dump offs. To me, that's kind of the key for him. Any other thoughts on Blake? How is he like? I don't know, a Virginia program that was a winning program for a while, but they were pretty bad last year. So I guess it's nice for him to go to a winning program.
Yeah, they were. They were. I think Christian, Blake Buchanan's favorite player maybe tells you a little bit about his mindset. I asked him, "Hey, who's your favorite all-time player?" And I'd ask you to guess, but I don't think you'd guess Hakeem Olajuwon.
Okay,
That's who Blake Buchanan. Somebody who's 21, 22 years old, grew up watching. And he loves the defensive attributes of Hakeem and, of course, the shot blocking and everything that goes into that. So I wasn't expecting that, but I think maybe that tells you a little bit about Blake and the kind of guy he wants to be.
8th in the ACC in block rate, and he was 6th in defensive rebounding rate last year too. So we'll see if that translates to a really physical Big 12. I want to go back to Dominic Nelson, who was the WAC Player of the Year, and it seems like he's going to be coming off the bench after transferring him from Utah Valley. I know he's another. I saw a clip of TJ talking about him. He's another one of these kind of late bloomers, like Curtis Jones was, of just the trajectory. I'm pretty sure he was at some type of JUCO or something before Utah Valley. You can tell me where, but what is his game like? As someone who didn't really watch him live, only really seen the highlights, and is he the sixth man on this team?
He is. I expect him to operate in that role. And it's so funny you draw that Curtis Jones comparison of similar paths to reaching the Power 5 Big 12 level. And Dominic Nelson is going to be coming off the bench. Curtis Jones was the sixth man last year. And Curtis Jones was awesome. He would come in, instant impact offense. I think what we've seen in the exhibition was Dominic Nelson get subbed in an immediate impact defense. He's so active with, creating steals. He had 4 of them against Northwestern in that exhibition. And you saw it immediately. That's what Otzelberger said is you bring this guy in, he kind of jumpstarts things and he gets you going in that way. So I do see him coming off the bench in kind of that sixth man role. The thing I know, Christian, that we're all going to be watching with him is that shot. How does he come in and develop that 3-point shot? It wasn't great. If he can get his free throw percentage a little bit higher, then that would be a super promising sign because he's a downhill player, likes to get fouled, and is really good at drawing fouls. So he's going to be at the free throw line a lot. You'd love to see him work with Iowa State shooting coach Eric Crawford. I know they've been in the lab together trying to get his 3-point shot and free throw shot improved. So that's going to be, I think, the big key for Dominic this season is, hey, we know you have the motor. We know you have the defensive things to succeed in the Big 12 level. Can you have enough of a shooting threat to open up some space for you to get downhill and make some of those scoring plays that way?
Right. 25% from 3 last year, and that definitely the swing skill. I'm parlaying this into. I assume he's a pretty good transition player as just a downhill athlete, defensive havoc wrecker, and it just brings me back to the intro when I said how much faster Iowa State played last year, but a lot of that in my head is a lot of Gilbert and Jones. Is TJ going to adapt to the personnel? Is this a team that needs to play slower once again? Or are guys like Nelson, guys like Heisey, even like in these freshmen we're about to get to, do you think Iowa State is going to kind of try to play the tempo that they played last year and run a transition when they can't?
I think they're absolutely going to try. Maybe they don't pull it off as well as they did last year. But Otzelberger, I think, brought these players in with his style of play in mind. It all starts with the defense with Otzelberger, and Iowa State, they're going to be aggressive. They're going to, continue to swing at you, fly at you, and make switches, all in an effort to block shots and be disruptive. Because their whole scheme is to turn you over and get in transition. When Iowa State does that, they're awesome. They're creating chaos, and they're getting a lot of those transition buckets that you mentioned. Where Iowa State runs into issues with that scheme is against teams like BYU, where they have so many shooters, they can make the extra pass, and they can hurt you from just about everywhere beyond the arc. Those are the teams that Iowa State's scheme has struggled against, and I think that's just the way it's built. And last year, Iowa State had the firepower to hang with BYU in a lot of those games. Those were electric, those high-scoring games. And we'll see if the Cyclones have the firepower to hang against that mismatch. But absolutely, Iowa State wants to get out in transition, up and down the court, everything starting with the defensive end.
Moving on with these freshmen that I mentioned, Jamarian Bateman and Killian Torrey. Tell me about their games. How far along are they? Are we going to see them a lot this season?
Bateman was the name that we heard a lot, this offseason as a guy who's going to come in and be an offensive scorer. And he's been okay. He hasn't had maybe, in the only 2 exhibitions that we've been able to watch, we don't see a lot of practice covering Iowa State. But, Bateman came in with a reputation for being a great offensive piece. And I think we might see that at some point. He'll definitely get a chance to play and help on the offensive end. The freshman that's really impressed me is Killian Torrey, this point guard from France who comes in. And maybe it's because we've seen him a little bit more. As I said, Tamin Lipsey's recovering from this injury. Torrey's been the guy who they've slotted in at that point guard position. He didn't score a lot against Creighton, but he played 27 minutes and only turned the ball over once, which is going to be, super impressive from a freshman. And Torrey plays defense. Like he has that ability to earn Otzelberger's trust with his defensive ability. And, he's athletic, Christian. When you watch him, he had a dunk against Northwestern. I thought, man, like Tamin Lipsey, he's not doing that. Tamin Lipsey's going to be helping you out in so many other ways, but he's not going up in transition and throwing that ball down like Killian Torrey is. So of those 2, I think Bateman has a bright future ahead from everything we heard in the offseason, but Torrey's been the guy to maybe show a little bit more of that from what we've seen in the first 2 exhibitions.
Is there anyone else on this roster that we haven't touched on yet that you think will be a key rotation piece?
Maybe one more freshman we could mention is Dominic Plata, the freshman from Germany who is coming in with multiple years of professional experience. He feels old for a freshman, and it's because he is. He told us he's been playing with guys who are 40 years old, and he's definitely somebody who is developed enough to a point where you'd feel comfortable with him out there. Plata is interesting. He's going to be maybe somebody to watch. I don't know exactly where he fits in yet with this Iowa State team, but he's certainly skilled. And I think he's one of those guys who's done a lot to earn Otzelberger's trust, which is what you're looking for as a newcomer. Christian, there was only one freshman to play any minutes for Iowa State last season. And, Noyes Indricitis is now at Pitt. He's gone. It was 1.2% of the time. I wrote a story about it today that Iowa State had a freshman on the court last season. This year, they're going to have to depend on the freshmen just because of, you look at the roster and the makeup of the team and what they're bringing in. So I'm certainly expecting, these freshman class to have a little bit more of an impact, starting with Torrey and Bateman. And, I might see Plata out there a little bit as well.
Is that a vote of confidence in the freshmen, or is it that the injury to Mason Williams, or just missing in the portal? Or does he honestly believe that these guys are ready for Big 12 minutes?
I do think it is a vote of confidence in the freshmen. We saw last year with Indricitis that unless you earn Otzelberger's trust, he's not playing you. He played a walk-on point guard, Cade Kelderman, in the NCAA tournament more than he played freshman point guard Noyes Indricitis last year. So it's all about the trust that these freshmen have earned. And I think that's the only reason we see him out there. So I think it's absolutely an express vote of confidence in those guys and what they've done.
Other than shooting and potentially Taman's health, does any other concerns about this roster come to mind?
Yeah, shooting was the big one, of course. That we saw the depth last year get a little tested as, Tamin Lipsey got hurt. Keyshawn Gilbert wasn't with the team during the NCAA tournament, and Iowa State was out there, playing a walk-on, Cade Kelderman against Houston and against Kelvin Sampson and that whole, defensive nightmare. So that was a tough scenario, and the Cyclones handled it pretty well. I think Kelderman played out, played exactly how you'd expect him to play, which was, just doing everything he could. So I'm curious to see if Iowa State has a little bit more, depth this season. I think they do with these freshmen, but that'd be something I'd watch because that was the thing that hurt Iowa State last season. From a Cyclone perspective, you'd love to see them peak at the right time. I mean, this team got up to number 2 in the nation last season through the Maui Invitational when Iowa State lost to Auburn at the buzzer. It looked like the Cyclones were absolutely, one of the best 2 teams in the country, and they would have been number 1, if not for that coin flip game. So it wasn't the same, when March rolled around. You'd absolutely love to see this Cyclone team peak at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, they were up 18 in that game. Like, it felt like a couple bang plays, and all of a sudden Auburn was back in it. But like, for a large portion of the season, Auburn was the clear number 1. It's like Iowa State was up 20 on them. So I always held on to that. So it was, of course, another great season last year. We finished top 20 on both offense and defense on KenPom, which is incredibly difficult to do, and that's just the feature of a national championship caliber team. So I don't know. I just think TJ has he's established himself as one of the best coaches in the country, like, undoubtedly. And, just retaining key pieces in some stylistic fits added on either by way of the portal or the high school ranks. I have high confidence in this team being, like, at minimum, a top 15 team in the country. Do you feel like that's fair? And do you think there's a chance that they can unlock the ceiling that they flashed, of course, at times last year?
I do think that floor you mentioned is very safe. They open up at 16 in the AP poll. And I think with this returning core, with all of Otzelberger's, traits that his teams exhibit, I do think Iowa State will probably, be definitely in the top 15 for the majority of the season. I don't think this team has quite the same ceiling that we saw last year of, getting up 18 on Auburn and Maui and really looking like the best team in the nation. But that was before, Curtis Jones. We had the same questions about him that we're asking about some of these other guys. And then he goes and just shoots the lights out of the ball and, gets signed by the Denver Nuggets. So I don't think this Iowa State team has that. I haven't seen that maybe national championship level ability. If I had to ballpark it, I'd say getting to the Sweet 16 would maybe be a successful season for what I look to see this team. For what I'm seeing right now, I think that'd be a successful season for them. So I don't think they have quite that national championship level upside that the team last year did.
Yeah, I agree. Always, it'll be interesting to see if there's any breakout. Like, all of a sudden, Dominic Nelson's just lights out. Like, what I mean, it's hard for guys to really make changes like that. But one thing's for sure, no one's going to have any fun playing Iowa State because of the way that they defend and how.
Not at all. Not at all.
TJ,
he has his guys, doing MMA training this offseason. So yeah, it's not going to be any fun at all.
There you have it, the Iowa State Cyclones. Thanks for joining me, Ben.